Mr. Aaron Smith, welcome to the program.
Hello.
And Mrs. Carol Smith, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
May I say how delighted we are to be on Passion. We've looked forward to speaking to an African television station for decades. This is something we have looked forward to for such a long time, and we are so happy to be here.
Thank you. Mr. Aaron Smith was a young, bright, and principled Oxford University graduate who was recruited by the Colonial Office and posted to Nigeria. He took his final examination a year ahead of his class. He also married Mrs. Carol Smith, whom he met while they were both at Oxford University. Together they went to Nigeria, where they had their 2 children. Mr. Aaron Smith, you were featured in a program recently by BBC Radio 4,
Yes.
titled Document,
Yes.
and that was hosted by Mr. Mike Thompson.
Yes.
You are alleged that the British government rigged the first and most important election in the history of Nigeria in 1959 in favor of the North. Am I correct?
Yes.
How long were you in Nigeria for?
From 1955 to 1960. And we were based in Lagos. I was on the staff of the Department of Labour. I was largely occupied with employment problems, all the employment exchanges, and statistics, and international reports, and was kept pretty busy. I was also stationed in Lagos in charge of the capital and the port. I was the port labour officer as well, and I also devised a port labour scheme and later a social security scheme, which was one of the first in Africa, which guaranteed workers some income after they'd finished work. It was a providence scheme. As I say, it was called the National Providence Scheme, and I was very proud to have put that on the statute book.
I was going to ask you what your role is. You've mentioned 3 important. Is there any particular name given to your office while you were there?
Just labour officer.
I was a labour officer, a senior civil servant.
Okay.
I only intended to stay in Lagos initially for 2 tours of duty. Although, because of this conflict with the elections, there were difficulties. Actually, government wouldn't let me leave the civil service. They were determined that I should stay in the civil service after my 2 tours. And I was offered very considerable incentives, including a knighthood, to stay and work for government. Primarily this was because I had access to state secrets. I learned, and the Governor General himself confirmed this to me, that the elections were rigged, contrived. The intention was that the North should rule Nigeria. Even in '56, the northern leaders were very proud and were saying, if they couldn't run Nigeria, never mind elections. They might not join Nigeria, they might leave. And we all thought, well, how would they survive? There were no industries, there's not a great deal of agriculture, some groundnuts in the north. This wasn't very practical at all. And then it was, the Governor General seemed to be thinking that the North couldn't, even if it won an election, rule Nigeria by itself. The South wouldn't stand for that. So there had to be a partner, either the Igbos in the east or the Yoruba in the west, to team up with the North. What he didn't want was for the 2 southern parties, the Igbo and the Yoruba, to team up to form the government, because he believed the North wouldn't tolerate that and talked about leaving the federation. So as I learned, in a small way at first, but very rapidly I learned about the election fixing, and as I say, this was confirmed to me by the Governor General. He actually said that he wanted me to know the truth, because he wanted me to know how much trouble I was in.
You mentioned statistics. You were collecting figures.
Yes.
Is that for labor and unemployed people only, or general?
Primarily, but obviously my interest was in the population
Of
generally.
Nigeria.
Yes, and Awolowo, the Yoruba leader of the action group,
Yep.
and Chief Enaharo, they too, other people were saying, where are all these millions of people in the north? Where are they? We're going up there to campaign. We want to know, And you see all these, thousands of miles of not very developed countryside, and yet the northerners are claiming that their voting registration figures are larger than in the south, larger, far more people up there. Well, actually, if you went through the Igbo land, Enugu and that, you saw lots and lots of people. If you went to Ibadan, again, Ibadan teeming, with millions of people. But we didn't actually see many northerners, and obviously not many northerners at that time came to Lagos. So this did arouse suspicion. Now, the Europeans, not stupid, we are watching what's going on in Nigeria, and we too are beginning to feel there's something not quite right here, that maybe the elections are not going to be as straightforward as they're meant to be. Nigeria was being described as the showcase of democracy, and it was expected that the nationalist leaders would win through. But actually, when the election results were announced by the Governor-General, before the vote was even in, he didn't count for that, he didn't wait for that. I have to tell you, the British were counting the votes, and the British cannot be trusted. They look after their friends. Loyalty is the big thing for the British. And we were friends with the emirs of the north. We looked on people like Enaharo and Awolowo as rather dangerous people. They might even be communists. That's ridiculous, actually. They couldn't be communists in 1,000 years. But this was a sort of thing that was being said. And we were, Europeans, were getting a bit worried about all this. It wasn't quite the honest, straightforward election that we were hoping for.
Apart from Professor Anderson and Dr. Patrick Wilmot that supported your submission on the rigged election, there were other people who also served in the colonial office in your days. Who opposed to this submission?
Initially, I was warned of what was going on by my senior officer, a Major Bunker. I didn't know, and I knew that the Governor-General had directed me to take all the office staff of the Ministry of Labour to help Chief Okoti Igbo in politicking in Warri. And this was most irregular, and I refused to do this. Having refused an order, I know what the drill is. You resign. I resign my post. That is the proper thing to do. What they did then was rather devious. They persuaded me to withdraw my resignation, and when I did, they sacked me. It didn't go through, but I thought this was a bit low after I'd resigned and was prepared to leave the country. This was not very nice behaviour. They later withdrew this and said that I had been of some service to the state, and actually commended me for what I had done, and said I could leave Nigeria with splendid testimonials, and we shook hands on this. And this was done with the recognition of the Deputy Governor-General, Sir Ralph Grey. And then I left Nigeria the first time and took up a job as a personnel officer, a very big job, with the Esso refinery. And then government came after me, declared that I was a traitor, and I had betrayed the British people, ought to be imprisoned. And I lost that job. And then they came to me again and said it's all been a big mistake. Dreadful mistake. I'm a jolly decent chap, Oxford chap, and they put me on a plane straight back to Nigeria, where I'd make up for the time I'd been away. There was a great deal of good work for me to do, and we fell for this. We shouldn't have gone back, but we did.
Now, if you recall what you said about the role of the Governor General and the attitude of the British government in particular, regarding the fear that Awolowo, Okotie-Eboh, and the lot of them from the south are dangerous, is there a particular reason? Why the fear from the British government? Is it that they don't want to release or relinquish Nigeria, or they still want to control Nigeria?
They knew that the North would do as they said after independence. If it had any, the North would just, because it was their habit, they liked the British, whereas the nationalists were an unknown factor. Actually, when they took the flag down and hoisted the Nigerian flag, not one of the major nationalist politicians was there. They weren't even on the platform. This was incredible. These were the people who had sought independence. The people in the North didn't want independence. They didn't want the British to leave. So this was a farce. And for most Europeans who were very close and watching this, we were disgusted. We thought this really had been manipulated, this election. It was unworthy. It was unworthy of the British people, this. This was no honest, straightforward thing that you would expect Britain, the mother of parliaments, to do. This was cheap and low and criminal. And I opposed it. And I opposed it then, and I've opposed it ever since. And I'm telling you the truth. And I was warned, if I told you this state secret, my life could be forfeit.
Earlier on, you said the British government wanted the North in alliance with either of the southern region, either with the Yorubas or with the Igbos.
But
without which they cannot
they can't do it this
rule the country.
The problem was that Awolowo was a highly principled man.
Okay.
You didn't talk to Awolowo about squalid deals and fixing things. Awolowo was not that kind of person. If you read his books, this man was a world statesman. And his young lieutenant, Chief Enaharo, was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. However, they did do a deal with Zik, Dr. Azikiwe, from the East. Dr. Azikiwe, there was this big problem in Nigeria. It's the same big problem in America and in Britain. How do you get funds to fight elections? The candidates in Nigeria had no money, but they did have marketing boards, which were a kind of semi-nationalized industry. And they borrowed money from the marketing boards. But there was a suspicion that Dr. Azikiwe, who has formed his own bank, the African Continental Bank, was actually bankrupt. But he was borrowing very large sums of money from the marketing boards and not necessarily repaying the loans. We knew this. We had a great secret service. All the politicians' phones were tapped. All the politicians' mail was opened. Everything that any major politician did in Nigeria, we knew in hours. We watched. We knew all that was going on.
Are you saying, in essence, that Dr. Azikiwe took money?
He was blackmailed by the British to do our bidding. We told Dr. Azikiwe that he could go to prison if an inquiry was carried out into his bank and his financial circumstances. However, We would not want to be vindictive if Dr. Azikiwe was cooperative in helping forward the plans that we had made in the best interests of Nigeria. Dr. Azikiwe had nothing in common with the northern politicians. He loathed the northern politicians. But Dr. Azikiwe went north and did as he was told. And what he was promised was this: the real power, effective power, would be in the hands of the northern emirs. However, it would look great if the president was Dr. Azikiwe, and he was given a field marshal's uniform and an admiral's uniform. He asked, please, could he have a row of medals? But they said, well, no, that was a bit difficult, to get the medals. So when the ambassadors started arriving, he was known to be asking people from foreign countries, perhaps they had a medal for his uniform. We thought this was terrible, but it was said that this happened. He was very vain. And for a time, he functioned as first the Governor General, and then when Nigeria became a republic, as the president. But he had no power. And when he did try to tell the army, he said, I'm the field marshal, the army has got to do with this. They said, hey, you're just a ceremonial figure. You have no power. The Prime Minister, Balewa, gives us our orders. So there was a feeling then that there was going to be trouble. And then it was because the Awolowo and the Action Group had become the official opposition. What we British wondered, how could they win another election without the British counting the votes? There could not be another proper run election without us there. We knew what we were doing. We were just helping things along. We were doing what the British do, favouring our friends and looking after our own and repaying favours. We don't call that corruption.
Right. I mean, in essence, what Dr. Azikiwe did, it was forced by the British government to do it.
Yes.
Collecting money from the marketing board then.
Yes.
So if any politician here in the United Kingdom tried to do that,
be in jail.
It will be in jail. So why did the British government refuse to take action?
Because
or comment on
if we nipped it in the bud, because we knew it was happening, it was even happening in, let me be fair, in the West with the Awolowo. They were taking some money. They meant to repay it perhaps, but they were taking money. And I would have said, issue a warning now and say, you've got to behave, because if this is allowed to go on, it'll be a major offence. However, before they actually ran the 1959 election, they needed money for the North and for the NCNC, Dr. Zik, to fight the election. So what they did, my senior officer, Major Bunker, went around, was ordered by the Governor General to go to all the major British firms and international firms, Ford, UAC, Leventis, all these firms, and raise money for a slush fund to enable Chief Okoti Igbo, together with the North, to fight the 1959 elections. The North got most of their money from the native authorities. This was looked on by the British as being okay. This wasn't corrupt because we were friends of the North. And if they tried this in the West or in the East, we might have said this was corruption. But because it happened in the North, the native authorities' public money was poured into the government party, the NPU. So this obviously was a terrible fiddle. We were discriminating against the southern politicians in favour of these northern emirs. What we saw was that this would not be the first act of treachery, they would have to smash the Action Group, because the Action Group was strong, and in a fresh election, they would be sure to win. They were pretty honest and regular guys, and a lot of the British quite admired Awolowo for his brain power. And they admired Chief Inahro, who was a bit cheeky and young and spirited. And they were both quite admired, as they were like right-wing Labour people, nothing revolutionary. And so a great deal of money was raised by my senior officer, Major Bunker, before the 1959 election. And this was money put up by United Africa, by Ford, Shell, BP, and my wife, who was the personal assistant to the general manager of BP Nigeria. She's not going to tell you anything because she was a confidential secretary. I can only tell you that we were very well informed on some of the hanky-panky that was going on in Lagos.
Having revealed now that the election of 1959 was rigged, the census figure were cooked, I don't know if you have been following the ongoing in Nigeria today.
Yes, of course.
The last general election,
yes.
The 1979-1980 election, in which Azekwe was the beautiful bride, and
I have to tell you, sir, that I'm not going to comment.
Okay.
I cannot interfere in Nigeria's domestic politics. I'm a historic figure. I do keep up, naturally, because I love Nigeria, and I've kept up with its history of its assassinations and military coups and dictatorships for 50 years, and this has been one of the biggest tragedies in world history, because this potentially was one of the greatest nations on earth. Nigeria was packed with educated, decent people who wanted to serve their country.
Since you lost that job that the government threatened or went behind you to say that you were disloyal to them and you were fired, have you ever worked any other place since?
Have I?
Have you worked in any other company
Yes.
since?
I didn't go to Oxford in the usual way. I came from a very poor family and left school when I was 13 years old. And I served a factory apprenticeship as an engineer, which is very unusual for an Oxford undergraduate. At Oxford also, I trained as a social worker. I'm a fully qualified social worker. So and as a personnel officer too, although the government stopped me working when I returned to this country and I was quite ill, I did a lot of voluntary work from this time on, both in the medical field, in the field of young girls. We also had campaigns on comprehensive schools. So I've kept very busy over the decades, although I have been kept out of employment quite deliberately. And when I did take up work, the government came after me and behaved abominably. And they did the most appalling things. They framed me with money missing. When I worked as a humble postman, after I'd worked as a personnel officer, I delivered the post to the workers who I'd employed. And they forced me out of that. They framed me. And later, when I was working in a labour exchange, they used the foulest methods to get me out of work. They told me they would. They said, the Governor General said, unless you do what I say, you will never work again. And he offered me this, and it's very big bribes: a knighthood, a post in the Far East, in the Foreign Service, and a large sum of money. And this was confirmed later in Whitehall, and we turned it down.
Thank you very much for your time to answer some of the questions we've posed to you. What would be your advice to the Nigerian audience watching us now?
They have potentially one of the greatest nations on earth. What they have to do is be disciplined, and they've got to unite together and love each other, be kind to each other. Like they're great to their own families. Nobody has nicer families and children than Nigerians. All Nigerians love their own family. They've got to extend that family to include their neighbours and the other peoples in the Federation.
We really appreciate your coming around. All Nigerians here in United Kingdom and Nigeria who are likely going to watch this interview as well, we want to say thank you very much. We welcome you and we wish you God building as you go back.
Give our love and appreciation to all your peoples.
Thank you
We
very
love
much.
them.
Thank you. Mrs. Carol Smith, we were unable to ask you a question, but we know that you are with us all the way. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much
Thank
indeed
you.
for having us. Thank you.